The sun hung low and merciless over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Samuel Hawthorne pulled his hat lower against the glare as his horse picked its way through the familiar yet alien terrain. 5 years. 5 years since he'd last laid eyes on the old ranch that had once been his entire world. The wooden fence posts leaned at drunken angles, their paint stripped away by wind and time. Tumbleweeds had claimed the front yard, rolling lazily in the hot breeze like ghosts of better days. The main house stood defiant against the elements, though its roof sagged in places and several shutters hung by single hinges, creaking a mournful song. Samuel dismounted, his boots stirring small clouds of red dust. He ran a weathered hand along his horse's neck, more for his own comfort than the animal's. This place held too many memories. Martha's laughter echoing from the kitchen, little Thomas taking his first steps on the porch. He pushed the thoughts away with practiced efficiency. That life belonged to another man, one who hadn't learned yet how cruel the frontier could be. The front door protested loudly when he shouldered it open. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light that followed him inside. He'd expected to find the place ransacked, picked clean by drifters and thieves. Instead, he found signs of recent habitation. A blackened coffee pot sat on the cold stove, but when Samuel touched it, residual warmth met his fingers. Fresh ashes lay in the fireplace. Not the years-old pile he'd anticipated. On the back of a chair hung a simple calico dress, faded but clean. His hand moved instinctively to the colt at his hip. "Show yourself," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. "I know you're here." For a moment, only silence answered. Then came the soft scrape of a bare foot on wood, and a fire emerged from the shadows of the back room. Samuel's breath caught. She couldn't have been more than 20, with tangled auburn hair that hadn't seen a proper brush in weeks. Her dress, not the one on the chair, was torn at the hem and dusty from travel. But it was her eyes that held him, green as prairie grass after rain, wide with fear but burning with something else. Defiance, maybe, or desperation. In her small hands, she clutched an old kitchen knife, rust spotting its blade. She held it out before her like a talisman, though her arms trembled with the effort. "This is my place," Samuel said, keeping his voice level. "Been in my family for 15 years. Ain't nobody been here for months," she countered, her accent marking her as Eastern-born. "I checked the land records in town. Place was listed as abandoned. Not abandoned, just left alone for a spell." They stood frozen in their standoff, predator and prey, though Samuel wasn't sure which role belonged to whom. The girl's knuckles were white around the knife handle, but something in her stance spoke of exhaustion rather than true threat. Then she said it. The words tumbled out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. "I will sleep with you." Samuel felt as if she'd slapped him. The knife lowered slightly as she continued, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "If you let me stay, I'll be yours. Cook, clean, whatever you want. Just don't make me leave. Put the knife down," Samuel said quietly. "I mean it," she insisted, mistaking his shock for negotiation. "I'm untouched, pure. That's worth something. Ain't it? Worth a roof and walls?" The word pure twisted in Samuel's gut. He'd seen enough of the world to know what drove young women to such offers. The frontier was no place for the gentle or defenseless, but hearing it spoken so plainly, like she was bartering a horse or a sack of grain, filled him with an unexpected anger. "I said, put the knife down." This time his voice carried an edge of command that made her flinch. Slowly, she set the blade on the table beside her, though she kept her hand close to it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma." She lifted her chin slightly. "Emma Clark." "Well, Emma Clark, I don't know what kind of men you've encountered, but I'm not in the business of trading shelter for that." He couldn't bring himself to be more specific. "You need to leave." "I can't." The defiance crumbled, revealing the frightened girl beneath. "They'll find me. Who'll find you?" She pressed her lips together, trust warring with desperation in her eyes. "Finally, the good folks of Millbrook, they run me out 3 days ago, said I was cursed, bringing bad luck to their crops, all because my mama died birthing me and my daddy." She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. "My daddy was a traveling man. Never stuck around to marry her proper." Samuel knew Millbrook, a small, mean-spirited town 2 days' ride east, the kind of place where gossip was currency and different was dangerous. "So, you broke into my house." "Door was open," she said quickly, "just hanging there. I only meant to rest a night, maybe 2, but then the storm came, and I couldn't travel, and—" She gestured helplessly at the room. "I kept it clean, fixed what I could." Samuel noticed then what he'd missed in his initial survey. The floors were swept, the windows cleaner than he'd left them. Books he'd abandoned on the table were neatly stacked. She'd tried to make a home of his ghost house. "Please," Emma said, and that single word carried more weight than her earlier offer. "I've got nowhere else." The sensible thing would be to give her supplies and send her on her way. Samuel had come here to be alone, to live out his remaining years without the complications of human connection. But looking at her, young, desperate, standing in a shaft of dying sunlight like some kind of lost angel, he felt the walls he'd built around his heart crack slightly. "You hungry?" he heard himself ask. Hope flared in her eyes. Yes, been living on roots and berries mostly. There's jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags. Bring them in." He paused, then added more gently, "And stop looking at me like I'm going to eat you, despite what you might think. Not every man out here is a monster." She darted past him to the door, keeping as much distance between them as the room allowed. Samuel sank into a chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 38 years. He'd come here for solitude, for the peace that only emptiness could provide. Instead, he'd found a scared girl who thought her body was her only currency. Emma returned with his supplies, setting them carefully on the table. She moved to prepare the simple meal with an efficiency that spoke of practice. As she worked, Samuel studied her more closely. Beneath the dirt and desperation, she had a pleasant face, not beautiful in the classical sense, but arresting in its earnestness. Her hands, though small, were calloused from work. "How long were you planning to hide here?" he asked. "Until they forgot about me." She didn't look up from the food she was arranging. "Or until I died, whichever came first." The matter-of-fact way she said it chilled him. "That's no kind of plan. It's the only one I had." She set a plate before him, then retreated to the far side of the table with her own portion. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days. Quick, efficient bites while keeping one eye on him. "Slow down," Samuel said. "You'll make yourself sick." She forced herself to comply, though he could see the effort it took. They ate in silence, the only sounds the whistle of wind through the gaps in the walls and the distant cry of a hawk. As darkness crept across the prairie, Samuel lit a lamp. Emma finished her meal and began clearing the dishes without being asked, moving around him in careful arcs like he was a dangerous animal. "You can stay the night," he said finally. "In the morning, I'll give you supplies and directions to Fort Laramie. They've got a mission there. Church folks who'll help you get sorted." "They'll ask questions," Emma said quietly, "about where I come from, why I'm alone, and when they find out—" She shrugged. "Church folks are the worst when it comes to bastards and their offspring." Samuel wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He'd seen how the righteous treated the fallen. "Just the night then," he said. "We'll figure the rest come morning." Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by suspicion. "And you don't want—" "What I want," Samuel said firmly, "is to not have this conversation again. You've got nothing I'm looking to take. Emma Clark. Now there's blankets in that chest. Make yourself a bed wherever you feel safest." He stood and headed for the door. "I'll bed down in the barn. Lock this behind me if it makes you feel better." "Where are you going?" Fear crept back into her voice. "To tend my horse, and to give you some peace." He paused at the threshold. "That offer you made, don't make it again. Not to me, not to anyone. You're worth more than that, even if you don't know it yet." He left before she could respond. Stepping out into the cooling night air, the stars were beginning to show, brilliant in the clear sky. Samuel breathed deeply, trying to clear his head of the girl's desperate words. "I will sleep with you," as if her body was just another trade good, like pelts or corn. He stayed in the barn longer than necessary, brushing his horse until its coat shone, checking and rechecking his gear. When he finally returned to the house, he found Emma curled in the corner farthest from the door, wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket. She'd placed the knife within easy reach, though her eyes were closed. Samuel settled by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees. He'd slept in worse places with worse company. At least she wasn't trying to rob him. Probably. As the fire crumbled to embers, he found himself thinking of Martha again. She would have taken the girl in without question, would have seen past the dirt and desperation to the person beneath. But Martha had always been the better one, the one who believed in human goodness despite all evidence to the contrary. A soft whimper drew his attention. Emma was crying in her sleep, quiet tears that she probably didn't even know were falling. Samuel pulled his coat tighter and stared into the darkness beyond the window. One night, he could manage one night of charity. Come morning, she'd be on her way, and he could return to the solitude he'd sought. But even as he told himself this, Samuel suspected the morning would bring complications he wasn't prepared to handle. The frontier had a way of making liars of men who thought they could control their fate. The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose shutters like skeletal fingers tapping for entry. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, long and mournful. Emma stirred but didn't wake, her hand tightening on the blanket. One night, Samuel told himself again. Just one night, but the words felt hollow, even to him. Morning came harsh and bright through the broken shutters. Samuel woke stiff from his night by the cold fireplace, his neck protesting the awkward angle. Emma was already up, standing by the window with her arms wrapped tight around herself, watching the sunrise paint the desert gold. "There's a well out back," Samuel said, his voice rough with sleep. "Water should still be good." She nodded without turning. "I know. Been using it." They moved around each other in careful silence, two strangers trying not to disturb the fragile peace. Samuel went to tend his horse while Emma prepared what breakfast she could from his meager supplies. When he returned, she'd set the table with mismatched plates she'd found somewhere, probably left behind from his previous life. "I need to know what happened," Samuel said as they sat down to eat. "In Millbrook, the whole truth." Emma's hand stilled on her coffee cup. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "My daddy was a medicine show man, doctor, Cornelius Clark's miracle elixir." Her mouth twisted at the memory. "Mama was the preacher's daughter, 16 and foolish, believing every sweet word he said." She took a sip of the bitter coffee before continuing. "When her condition started showing, the town turned cruel. But the preacher, my grandfather, he kept her close, said God would forgive if she repented. She died bringing me into the world, and grandfather raised me out of duty, not love. And he's gone now. 3 months passed. Lung fever took him." Emma's green eyes met his directly for the first time since he'd found her. Soon as he was in the ground, the good Christians of Millbrook started talking. Bad blood, they said, cursed. When the drought hit and crops started failing, they needed someone to blame. Samuel had seen it before, how quickly fear could turn neighbors into monsters. So they ran you out. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife, she came with a group of women, said I was tempting their menfolk with my wicked ways. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'd barely spoken to any man in town, kept to myself just like grandfather taught me. But that didn't matter. They gave me an hour to pack. And you came here? I ran west because that's where the road led. Found this place after 3 days of walking. Door was hanging open like it was waiting. She gestured at the room. Felt like a gift from Providence. Samuel pushed his plate away. Appetite gone. You can't stay here. Emma, this isn't a life for a young woman. And what life is? The defiance flared again. You think Fort Laramie will be different? Think those church folks won't see exactly what everyone else sees? A bastard born of sin. You're not— Yes, I am. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That's what I am in the eyes of the world, and that's why I said what I said last night, because at least if I'm going to be treated like a fallen woman, I might as well get a roof over my head for it. The brutal honesty of her logic made Samuel flinch. He understood the cruel arithmetic of survival, had made his own dark bargains with fate, but hearing it from someone so young made him want to punch something. How old are you? He asked quietly. 19 come winter. Younger than he'd thought, younger than Martha had been when they'd married. The comparison rose unbidden, and he pushed it away. You know anything about keeping house? Real work. I mean, not just sweeping floors. Hope flickered in her eyes. Grandfather made sure I could earn my keep. I can cook, mend, tend vegetables. I know some healing herbs and such. Can read and write too, if that matters. Samuel considered his options. Sending her away would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But when had the frontier ever rewarded safe choices? I came here to be alone, he said carefully. Got my reasons for that, but I suppose having someone to keep the place from falling down wouldn't be the worst thing. Emma's whole body tensed. What would you want in return? Work, Samuel said firmly. Nothing more. You cook, clean, help with repairs. In exchange, you get shelter and half of whatever supplies we can manage. And if anyone asks, you're my cousin from back east. Come to help me get the ranch running again. Understood. Why? The question burst from her. Why would you do this? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Maybe because someone once gave me a chance when I needed it. Maybe because I'm tired of eating my own cooking. Does it matter? She studied him with those keen green eyes, looking for the trap. Finally, no, I suppose it doesn't. There are rules. Samuel continued. This is a business arrangement. You sleep in here. I'll fix up the lean-to out back for myself. We keep respectful distance. And that offer you made last night, we never speak of it again. You work for your keep, nothing else. I can do that. Relief made her voice shaky. I'm a hard worker. Mr. Hawthorne, you won't regret this. We'll see. He stood, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of her gratitude. I'm going to town for supplies. Make a list of what you need, practical things only. And Emma? Yes. When I get back, I want you to tell me about whoever it is you think might come looking. The whole truth this time. Fear flickered across her face before she nodded. Samuel grabbed his hat and headed for the door, already second-guessing his decision. But something in the girl's eyes, that mixture of pride and desperation, reminded him of his own dark days after losing everything. Everyone deserved a chance to prove the world wrong. The ride to town gave him time to think. Millbrook was 2 days east, far enough that word might not travel quickly, but the frontier had a way of spreading gossip like wildfire. If Emma had admirers or enemies, they'd eventually hear about the abandoned ranch with new occupants. The general store in Cedar Ridge was run by Jakob Muller, a German immigrant who minded his own business as long as your money was good. Samuel bought flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and ammunition, adding a bolt of simple cloth and some basic sewing supplies after a moment's hesitation. Ranch, coming back to life? Jakob asked as he tallied the order, thinking about it. Samuel replied carefully, got some help from family back east. Good. Land needs working. Jakob's eyes were knowing but uncurious. You need anything else, you let me know. Samuel was loading his horse when he spotted them, 3 riders coming in from the east, dust-covered and asking questions at the saloon. One had the look of a lawman, or someone who wanted others to think he was— Samuel pulled his hat low and finished his business quickly. Emma was in the vegetable garden when he returned, pulling weeds from around some scraggly plants that had somehow survived the neglect. She'd pinned her hair up and rolled her sleeves, looking more like a farmer's daughter than a desperate runaway. Company might be coming, Samuel said without preamble. 3 men from the east, asking questions in town. The color drained from her face. Did they see you? Don't think so. But we need to be prepared. He handed her the supplies. Who are they? Emma clutched the bundle of cloth like a lifeline. Thomas Brennan probably leads them. He owns the biggest spread near Millbrook. Been trying to court me since I turned 16. And you refused him. Grandfather refused him. Said no granddaughter of his would marry a papist. She laughed bitterly. Brennan didn't take it well. After grandfather died, he came around again, said I needed protection, a proper husband. When I said no, he joined the mob running you out. He told everyone I'd been sneaking around with traveling men, that I'd bewitched him into improper thoughts. Her jaw tightened. Said if I wouldn't have him honest like, maybe I needed teaching about my place. Samuel felt the familiar cold anger that came before violence. Men like Brennan were common as dust on the frontier, small kings in smaller kingdoms, taking what they wanted because no one could stop them. Can you shoot? He asked. Grandfather thought it unseemly for women. Well, grandfather's not here. After supper, we start lessons. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Samuel checked his weapons, reinforced the door, and showed Emma the root cellar where she could hide if needed. She worked beside him without complaint, quick to learn and quicker to understand the seriousness of their situation. As the sun set, he set up targets behind the house, old cans and bottles on a fence rail. The Spencer rifle was too heavy for her, but his old Navy Colt fit her hands well enough. Don't jerk the trigger, he instructed. Squeeze gentle, like you're picking berries. Let the gun do the work. Her first shots went wild, but Emma had steady hands and determination. By full dark, she could hit one can in 3 at 20 paces. Not great, but better than nothing. Will they really come? She asked as they cleaned the weapons by lamplight. Men like Brennan don't like being told no, especially not by women they think belong to them. Samuel checked the Colt's cylinder. But this is my land. They'll find no welcome here. Emma was quiet for a moment. I brought trouble to your door. Maybe I should... You should learn to reload faster, Samuel interrupted. And stop thinking about running. You do that, they win. Sometimes the only choice is to stand your ground and make them pay dear for every inch. She looked at him with something like wonder. You talk like a soldier. Was one once. Long time ago. Before Martha. Before the ranch. Before everything fell apart. But those were stories for another night. If ever. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes after shared work. Emma had pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall in auburn waves past her shoulders. In the lamplight, she looked even younger, but there was steel in her spine that hadn't been there this morning. Mr. Hawthorne? She said quietly. Thank you for not being what I expected. Get some rest, he said gruffly. Tomorrow we start making this place look lived in. If Brennan comes calling, we want him to see a working ranch, not a hideout. Emma rose, then paused at the door to the bedroom. That thing I said when we met, I'm sorry. I was scared, I know. Samuel kept his eyes on the gun he was cleaning. Fear makes us say and do things we wouldn't otherwise. Just remember, you're worth more than what others try to make you. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different. She nodded and disappeared into the darkness of the next room. Samuel sat up a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere out there, Thomas Brennan and his men were looking for a runaway girl they thought they owned. They'd find her eventually. Men like that always did. But they'd also find Samuel Hawthorne, and he'd been running from his own ghosts long enough. Maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting for something again, even if that something was just a frightened girl's right to choose her own path. The coyotes howled again in the distance, but tonight they sounded less mournful and more like a warning. Samuel smiled grimly and headed to his makeshift bed in the lean-to. Let them come. The ranch might be broken, but it wasn't defenseless. Not anymore. The first snow came early that year, dusting the desert mountains like flour on a baker's table. Samuel woke to find the world transformed. The harsh edges of the landscape softened beneath a thin white blanket. From the lean-to, He could see Emma's footprints leading to the well, each step precise in the pristine snow. 3 months had passed since that first tense night. Brennan and his men had never materialized, though Samuel kept watch and Emma still startled at unexpected sounds. The ranch had slowly returned to life under their combined efforts. Fences mended, roof patched, the vegetable garden coaxed back from near death. "Coffee's ready," Emma called from the doorway, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She'd taken to wearing an old coat of Martha's he'd found in a trunk, and the sight of it still made his chest tight some mornings. Inside, the kitchen was warm with the heat from the stove. Emma had made the place homier than Samuel remembered it being even in its best days. Curtains sewn from the fabric he'd bought hung at the windows, herbs dried in bunches from the rafters. A rag rug covered the worst of the floor's scars. "Ice on the water barrel?" she reported, setting a mug before him. "Winter's coming hard. We'll need more firewood," Samuel said. "And to check the roof again before the real storms hit." They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the weeks. Morning chores, afternoon repairs, evenings by the fire where Emma would read aloud from the few books in the house while Samuel cleaned guns or mended tack. She never asked about his past, and he didn't probe deeper into hers. It was a comfortable arrangement built on mutual respect and unspoken boundaries. "I can start splitting wood after breakfast," Emma offered. She'd grown stronger with regular meals and hard work, no longer the desperate waif who'd offered herself for shelter. "We'll do it together. That old pine by the creek needs to come down anyway." They worked through the morning, Samuel felling the dead tree while Emma sectioned the trunk with the saw. She'd learned to handle tools with surprising skill, her movements economical and sure. When they stopped for water, her cheeks were flushed with effort and cold, eyes bright with the satisfaction of hard work. "You're different than when you came," Samuel observed. Emma considered this, wiping sweat from her brow despite the chill. "I feel different, like I'm finally allowed to take up space in the world." She gave him a sideways look. "You're different too. Less like you're waiting to die." The observation hit closer than comfortable. Samuel had come to the ranch planning to slowly fade away, to let the desert eventually claim him like it had claimed so many others. But teaching Emma, working alongside her, had awakened something he'd thought buried with his family. "Maybe we're both finding what we didn't know we were looking for," he said quietly. That afternoon, while Emma prepared dinner, Samuel rode the property line, checking for damage from the early snow. The silence of the white-dusted landscape was profound, broken only by his horse's breathing and the creak of saddle leather. At the eastern boundary, he found fresh tracks, shod horses, at least 4. Circling back toward town after scouting the ranch, he returned as darkness fell, finding Emma on the porch despite the cold, the navy coat visible in her apron pocket. "Saw riders?" she asked. "Tracks, day old, maybe 2. Her jaw tightened, but she merely nodded. "Stew's ready, and I fixed that tear in your good shirt." Over dinner, they discussed fortifications with the casual air of people discussing weather, where to position water barrels in case of fire, which windows gave the best firing angles, how much ammunition they had versus how much they'd need. The conversation should have been grim, but there was something almost comfortable about facing danger together. "I've been thinking," Emma said as she cleared the plates. "If trouble comes, it might not be about me anymore. Men like Brennan don't like being defied. You've done that just by taking me in." "Let them come," Samuel said. "This ranch has seen worse than Thomas Brennan." Emma studied him across the table. "What did happen here, before—" Samuel was quiet long enough that she probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I had a wife, Martha, sweet as spring water and twice as necessary. We built this place together, board by board. Had a son too, Thomas." He smiled slightly at the memory. "Barely walking but determined to help with everything." "What happened to them?" "Scarlet fever. Took them both in the span of 3 days while I was in town getting medicine that came too late." His voice was steady. but his knuckles were white around his coffee cup. I buried them out by the big cottonwood. Couldn't stay after that. Every board, every stone reminded me of what I'd lost. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "It was 5 years ago. Time enough for the sharp edges to wear down some." He met her eyes. "But you're right. I was waiting to die. Figured it was only fair, since they didn't get to live. And now? Now I think maybe Martha would tan my hide for wasting what time I've got left." He stood abruptly. "I'll check the stock." Outside. The cold bit deep, but Samuel welcomed it. He'd spoken more about Martha and Thomas than he had since the day he'd put them in the ground. Something about Emma made the words easier, like she understood loss in her bones. When he returned, he found her sitting by the fire, mending one of his work shirts with tiny, precise stitches. The domestic scene hit him unexpectedly. How many evenings had Martha sat just so, doing the same task? "I put hot water on for washing," Emma said without looking up. "And there's coffee if you want it." He settled into his chair, watching her work. The firelight caught the red in her hair, turning it to copper and gold. She'd filled out in the months since arrival, no longer gaunt with hunger and fear. There was a contentment to her movements that hadn't been there before. "Why do you stay?" he asked suddenly. Emma's needle paused. "Where else would I go?" "That's not an answer." She set down the mending and looked at him directly. "I stay because this is the first place I've ever felt useful. Wanted for what I could do, not what I was or wasn't." She smiled slightly. "And because you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw something worth protecting, not possessing." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Samuel felt the dangerous pull of connection, the warmth that came before caring too much. He'd sworn never to feel that again, never to risk that kind of loss. "Emma, I know," she said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that this is more than shelter to me. This is home, the first real home I've ever had." A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind whistled through the gaps in the walls, promising worse weather to come. But inside, the room was warm and lamplit, filled with the comfortable silence of two people who'd learned to exist in the same space without demands or expectations. "Teach me to shoot the rifle tomorrow?" Emma asked, returning to her mending. "The colt's fine, but if they come in numbers..." "We'll start at first light." Samuel agreed. "You've got steady hands. Should take to it well enough." They sat quietly after that, each lost in thought. Samuel found himself studying the way Emma's face changed when she concentrated. The little furrow between her brows, the way she bit her lower lip. Dangerous thoughts for a man who'd sworn off attachments. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, answered by another, then another. The pack was hunting, using the snow to their advantage. Emma shivered slightly at the sound. "They won't come close to the fire," Samuel assured her. "I know. It's just... sometimes I dream about running through the snow with nowhere safe to go. Wake up sure I'm still out there, freezing and alone. You're not alone now." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Emma looked up, something unreadable in her green eyes. For a moment, the space between them seemed to shrink, filled with possibilities neither dared name. Then she smiled, soft and understanding. "Neither are you. Samuel Hawthorne, neither are you." Later, lying in his cold bed in the lean-to, Samuel stared at the ceiling and wondered when he'd started thinking of Emma as his to protect, when her presence had shifted from intrusion to necessity, when the thought of her leaving had become unbearable. The smart thing would be to send her away before Brennan made his move, find her safe passage to California or Oregon. Somewhere she could start fresh without the shadow of her past. But Samuel had never been accused of being smart when it mattered. Through the thin wall, he could hear Emma preparing for bed, the whisper of fabric, the creak of floorboards, the soft splash of water in the basin. Such ordinary sounds. But they made the house feel alive again in a way it hadn't since Martha died. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about green eyes and copper hair. about the way she'd laughed when she finally hit 3 targets in a row, about how right she looked in Martha's old coat. Tried not to think about how saving Emma might have really been about saving himself. The wind picked up, rattling the lean-to's boards and sending icy fingers through every gap. Winter was coming hard and fast, and with it, Samuel suspected, would come the reckoning they'd both been waiting for. Brennan wouldn't wait forever. Men like him never did. But for tonight, Emma was safe and warm by the fire. The ranch was secure, and for the first time in 5 years, Samuel Hawthorne had something worth fighting for again, even if he couldn't quite admit what that something was becoming. The winter deepened, bringing storms that howled down from the mountains like vengeful spirits. Snow piled against the ranch house walls, and ice formed thick on the water barrels each morning. Samuel and Emma worked together to keep the place running, feeding the 2 horses they'd acquired, maintaining the fire, rationing their supplies carefully. It was during the worst blizzard yet that Samuel found Emma sitting alone on the porch despite the freezing wind, tears frozen on her cheeks. He'd woken to find her missing from the house, panic driving him out into the storm until he spotted her huddled form. "Emma, what in blazes are you doing?" He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, pulling her back toward the door. "Sometimes I can't breathe in there," she said through chattering teeth. "The walls feel too close, like they're pressing in." He guided her inside, settling her by the fire and wrapping additional blankets around her trembling form. "How long does this happen?" "Since Millbrook. Since they cornered me in the church. All those righteous faces telling me I was cursed." She pulled the blankets tighter. "Some nights I wake up and I'm back there, surrounded, with nowhere to run." Samuel heated water for tea, adding a generous splash of whiskey from his medicinal supplies. "Here, drink this." She took the cup gratefully, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I know it's foolish." "It's not foolish. Mind has its own wounds, same as the body. They just don't show as clear." Emma looked at him over the steaming cup. "You have them too. I've heard you at night sometimes, calling for Martha." Samuel stiffened, but her tone held no judgment, only understanding. "We all carry our ghosts," he said quietly. They sat together watching the fire, the storm raging outside but unable to touch them here. After a while, Emma spoke again. "I used to love winter in Millbrook. Grandfather would let me help with the Christmas preparations at church. I'd hang the greens and polish the candlesticks until they shone. You miss it? The church life. I miss belonging somewhere, having a purpose people valued." She set down the empty cup. "Here, with you. I have that again. But sometimes I wonder what happens when spring comes, when the road's clear and the world opens up again." "What do you mean?" "I mean that men like Brennan don't forget, and you can't hide me forever." She met his eyes directly. "What happens when they come, Samuel? What happens after?" He wanted to promise her safety, permanence, all the things she'd never had. But Samuel had learned the hard way that the frontier kept no promises. "We face it when it comes. Together. Together," she repeated softly. Then, with forced brightness, "I should check the stew." The next weeks passed in relative peace. They developed routines within routines. Samuel teaching Emma to shoot the Spencer rifle. Emma teaching Samuel to bake bread the way her grandmother had. He showed her how to track deer in snow. She showed him how to mend with invisible stitches. Each skill shared was another thread binding them together, though neither spoke of it. One evening in late January, as Emma read aloud from Pilgrim's Progress, Samuel surprised himself by saying, "Martha couldn't shoot worth a damn." Emma looked up from the book. "No?" Tried to teach her for years. She'd close both eyes and jerk the trigger like she was afraid of the gun. He smiled at the memory. But she could calm a spooked horse with just her voice. Had a way with living things I never understood. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Samuel stared into the fire. "Different from you, though. Martha was made for peaceful times, for church socials and quilting bees. You're made of sterner stuff." Circumstance made me stern. Emma corrected. I wonder sometimes who I might have been in a kinder world. Maybe. But this isn't a kind world, and I'm glad you're who you are. The admission surprised them both. Samuel cleared his throat. That is, you're useful. Good in a crisis. Emma hid a smile. High praise from Samuel Hawthorne. They returned to the book, but something had shifted. The careful walls between them had developed cracks, letting in dangerous light. Samuel found himself watching her more openly, the graceful way she moved around the kitchen, how she hummed while working, the determined set of her jaw when practicing with the rifle. February arrived with a break in the weather. The snow began to melt, creating a muddy mess around the ranch, but also the promise of spring. It was while checking the fence lines that Samuel spotted them, 5 riders approaching from the east, taking their time, wanting to be seen. He rode back fast, finding Emma in the garden plot she'd been preparing. Company coming. 5 men. Her face paled, but her voice was steady. Brennan? Could be. Get inside. Load the rifles. Remember what we practiced. They took positions at different windows, watching the riders approach. Samuel recognized the type hired guns mixed with local toughs, the kind of men who enjoyed their work too much. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with graying temples and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Samuel Hawthorne? The leader called out, stopping just outside rifle range. Thomas Brennan, I believe you've got something belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you, Brennan. Samuel called back. This is private property. State your business or move on. My business is with the girl, Emma Clark. Her grandfather promised her to me before he died. Legal and binding. That's a lie, Emma hissed from her position, but Samuel motioned her to silence. Even if that were true, which I doubt, the girl's of age to make her own choices. She's chosen to work here as my housekeeper. Nothing improper about it. Brennan's laugh was ugly. Housekeeper, that what they're calling it now? He shifted in his saddle. Look, Hawthorne, I'm trying to be civilized about this. The girl's touched in the head. Everyone in Millbrook knows it. Needs a firm hand to guide her. I'm willing to compensate you for your trouble. Say, $50. Not for sale, Samuel said flatly. Everything's for sale. Just a matter of price. Brennan's voice hardened. I'm being generous here. Could just take what's mine. You're welcome to try. Samuel let the barrel of his rifle become visible in the window. But I should mention I've got 3 men with rifles trained on you right now, and the girl's become a fair shot herself. You might get us, but not before we get some of you. Question is, which of your men are you willing to lose for a woman who doesn't want you? It was a bluff about the extra men, but Brennan didn't know that. His companions shifted nervously, suddenly aware of every window, every shadow that might hide a gun. This isn't over, Brennan said finally. You can't watch her forever, and when you slip up, I'll be there. Then I guess I won't slip up. Samuel's voice was conversational, but his finger rested on the trigger. Now get off my land. Brennan wheeled his horse around sharply. Remember, I tried to be reasonable. Hawthorne, what happens next is on your head. They waited until the riders were specks in the distance before lowering their weapons. Emma's hands shook as she set down the rifle. He won't give up? Men like him never do. No, Samuel agreed. But he's also a coward. Came with 5 men to collect 1 woman. He'll think twice before trying again. Or he'll come with 10 next time. Samuel couldn't argue with that logic. They spent the rest of the day reinforcing defenses, setting up water barrels, creating fallback positions. As night fell, Emma made a simple dinner, though neither had much appetite. I should leave, she said quietly, before someone gets killed over me. Where would you go? West, California maybe, somewhere he can't follow. You wouldn't make it 50 miles alone. And even if you did, what then? Same problems, different place. Samuel pushed his plate away. Besides, you leave now and he wins. Thought you were done running. I just... She trailed off, then looked at him with those green eyes that had become too important. I don't want you hurt because of me. You've been nothing but kind. And if something happened to you? Without thinking, Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her deliberately, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Nothing's going to happen to me, or you. We're going to weather this like we've weathered everything else. Together. Emma turned her hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. When did I become worth protecting, Samuel? When did I stop being just a problem that showed up at your door? The question hung between them, demanding honesty he wasn't sure he could give, but looking at her, strong and vulnerable, fierce and gentle. Samuel found the words coming anyway. Maybe when you stopped seeing yourself as something to be traded, maybe when you picked up that rifle and decided to fight, or maybe... He squeezed her hand gently. Maybe it was that first night, when you were so desperate and brave all at once, when you offered the only thing you thought you had, not knowing you were worth so much more. Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks, but she was smiling. You saved me, you know, not just from Brennan or the cold, from believing what they all said about me. We saved each other, Samuel corrected. I was just too stubborn to die, but you gave me a reason to live. That's a harder thing by far. They sat holding hands as darkness fell, neither willing to break the connection. Outside, a late winter storm was building, but inside the ranch house, something warm and precious had taken root, fragile as spring flowers but determined to bloom despite the harsh ground. When they finally parted for the night, Emma paused at her bedroom door. Samuel, whatever comes next, I want you to know this has been the best winter of my life. He watched her disappear into the darkness, then went to check the windows and doors one more time. Brennan would be back. Men like him always came back. But Samuel had something to fight for now, something more than mere survival. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like a gift worth any price. The uneasy peace lasted 3 weeks. Samuel and Emma maintained their vigilance, taking turns keeping watch, never venturing far from the ranch alone. The late winter days grew longer, and with them came a deceptive sense of normalcy. Emma tended her growing garden, coaxing early vegetables from the warming soil. Samuel repaired the barn, preparing for the horses they might acquire come spring. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Samuel was in town getting supplies, having left Emma with strict instructions to bar the doors and keep the rifle close. The trip couldn't be avoided. They were dangerously low on ammunition and flour. He was loading his purchases when Jakob Muller pulled him aside. That man Brennan, he's been around, asking questions about you and the girl. What kind of questions? Whether you come to town regular, whether you come alone. Jakob's weathered face was grave. He's got more men with him now. 7, maybe 8. They're camping outside town. Samuel's blood ran cold. He'd left Emma alone. Throwing the last sack onto his horse, he mounted quickly. Jakob, if anything happens... I know nothing, the shopkeeper said firmly. But Samuel, the sheriff's been paid to look elsewhere. You'll get no help from the law. The ride back was the longest of Samuel's life. Every minute stretched like an hour. Every shadow could hide an ambush. When he finally crested the hill overlooking the ranch, his worst fears materialized. Smoke rose from the direction of the barn. Horses milled in the yard, 6 of them. And on the porch, Thomas Brennan sat in Samuel's chair like he owned the place. Samuel dismounted quietly, tying his horse out of sight and approaching on foot. Through the kitchen window, he glimpsed Emma backed against the wall, her face defiant despite the bruise blooming on her cheek. 2 men flanked her, grinning like wolves. Rage, cold and deadly, flowed through Samuel's veins, but rage without planning got people killed. He circled to the back of the house, grateful for the noise Brennan's men were making. The root cellar door was still concealed beneath the wood pile. Emma hadn't given away all their secrets. Inside the cellar, Samuel retrieved the second rifle and extra ammunition they'd hidden. The space connected to the house through a narrow passage, something he'd added during the Indian raids years ago. He emerged in the pantry, able to hear voices clearly now. Told you he'd leave eventually, Brennan was saying. Men like Hawthorne always think they're smarter than everyone else. Now, we can do this easy or hard. You come willing, I might forget this whole unfortunate episode, make you respectable again. I'd rather die. Emma's voice was steady despite everything. That can be arranged too. One of the other men laughed, though it'd be a waste. Samuel eased into the main room, rifle ready. The two men guarding Emma had their backs to him, focused on their prey. Through the window, he could see Brennan rising from the chair, moving inside. "Brennan," Samuel said quietly. Everyone spun toward his voice. In the split second of surprise, Samuel acted. The rifle butt caught the nearest man in the temple, dropping him like a stone. The second man reached for his gun, but Emma moved too, grabbing the hot coffee pot from the stove and flinging it in his face. His screams brought Brennan and the others running. "Get to the cellar," Samuel ordered Emma, but she grabbed the fallen man's pistol instead. "I'm done running," she said grimly. Brennan appeared in the doorway, his own gun drawn. "Should have taken my offer. Hawthorne could have avoided all this unpleasantness. Only thing unpleasant here is you." Samuel replied, rifle trained on Brennan's chest. "Call off your men." "Can't do that. See, you made this personal. Man can't let such disrespect stand." Brennan smiled coldly. "Besides, the boys are looking forward to their fun." Gunfire erupted from outside. Samuel shoved Emma behind the heavy table as windows shattered. Brennan dove for cover, shouting orders to his men. The small house became a battlefield, gun smoke thick in the air. "How many rounds you got?" Emma asked, checking her stolen pistol. "Not enough," Samuel admitted. "But they have to come through the doors eventually." A torch sailed through the broken window, followed by another. The dry wood of the floor began to smolder. "Or they burn us out," Emma said bitterly. Samuel stamped out the nearest flames, but more torches followed. Soon, smoke filled the room, making breathing difficult. Through the chaos, he heard Brennan laughing. "Come on out, Hawthorne. No shame in knowing when you're beat." Samuel looked at Emma, her face streaked with soot, eyes watering from smoke, but still defiant. His brave, fierce Emma, who deserved better than dying in a burning house for the crime of refusing a man. "Stay low," he told her. "When I start shooting, you run for the root cellar. Get to town, find Jakob Muller. He'll help you get away." "I'm not leaving you." "Emma, no!" She gripped his arm. "We stand together or not at all. That's what you taught me." Before Samuel could argue, a new sound cut through the crackling flames. Horses approaching fast. Brennan's men began shouting, their attention diverted. Then came a voice Samuel recognized. "Thomas Brennan, this is Sheriff Coleman from Cedar Ridge. You and your men are under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Samuel peered through the smoke. Sure enough, Coleman sat tall on his horse, backed by a half-dozen deputized townsmen, and beside them, Jakob Muller held a rifle with grim determination. "Since when do you care about the law, Coleman?" Brennan shouted back. "You were paid to stay away." That was before Muller here reminded me that allowing murder makes me accessory to it. And before half the town decided they'd had enough of outside thugs causing trouble. Coleman's voice hardened. "Drop your weapons, now." The standoff stretched taut. Some of Brennan's men began backing toward their horses, calculating odds, 7 against 7. But the townsmen had better position and righteous anger on their side. "You side with a bastard and her keeper?" Brennan snarled. "Over me. I side with folks who mind their own business and don't bring trouble to my town." Coleman replied, "Last warning." Brennan made his choice, raising his gun toward the sheriff. The yard exploded in gunfire. Samuel pulled Emma down as bullets whined overhead, through the window. He saw Brennan spin and fall, clutching his shoulder. 2 of his men were already down, the rest scattering. "Hold your fire!" Coleman shouted as the remaining outlaws threw down their weapons. "It's over." Samuel and Emma emerged from the smoke-filled house, coughing but alive. The sheriff surveyed the damage with disgust. "Brennan, you're a damn fool. All this over a woman who don't want you?" Brennan, pale and bleeding, managed to prop himself up, his eyes fixed on Emma with poisonous hatred. "She's a whore. Her mother was a whore. She'll spread her legs for anyone who—" Emma stepped forward and slapped him hard enough to snap his head back. "My mother loved the wrong man. That's her only crime, and I've chosen a better one." She moved to stand beside Samuel, taking his hand. "One who sees my worth beyond my body or my birth." Touching. Brennan spat blood. "But this ain't over. You'll hang." Coleman interrupted. "Attempted murder, arson, assault. Judge Carter takes a dim view of such things." He motioned to his men. "Get him patched up enough to stand trial. Rest of you, start walking toward town. We'll collect you proper later." As the deputies worked, Jakob approached Samuel and Emma. "When I saw him gathering men, I figured you might need help. Convinced Coleman that letting a murder happen would end his career right quick." "We owe you," Samuel said sincerely. "No debt between neighbors." Jakob replied, "Besides, the girl's good for you. Anyone can see it." As the crowd dispersed, Coleman pulled Samuel aside. "This won't be the end of your troubles. Brennan's got family, friends. They might come calling." "Let them," Samuel said, watching Emma direct men to fight the remaining fires. "We'll be ready." Coleman studied him. "You sure about her? Taking on another man's grudge is serious business." "She's not another man's anything," Samuel said firmly. "She's her own woman, and if she'll have me, she's mine to protect." The sheriff shrugged. "Your funeral. Though from what I saw today, she might be the one doing the protecting." He mounted his horse. "We'll need you both to testify at the trial." As the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Samuel surveyed the damage. The barn was a total loss. One wall of the house was charred, and most of the windows were broken. But they were alive. They'd stood together and survived. Emma appeared at his elbow, her face exhausted but triumphant. "Well, the garden survived, so there's that." Samuel laughed, surprising them both. "Leave it to you to find the bright side. Someone has to." She leaned against him slightly. "Samuel, what I said to Brennan, about choosing a better man. You were making a point, I understand." "No, I don't think you do." She turned to face him fully. "I meant it, every word." The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the ranch bore the scars of battle, but it still stood. They'd rebuild, stronger than before. And maybe, Samuel thought as Emma smiled up at him, they'd build something more than just walls and fences. "We should see about temporary repairs before dark," he said, but made no move to step away from her. In a moment, Emma agreed, content to stand in the circle of his arms as the day died around them. In town, Thomas Brennan sat in a cell nursing his wounded shoulder and pride. But at the ranch, Samuel Hawthorne and Emma Clark stood together, no longer running from the past but facing the future. Whatever came next, they'd meet it as they'd met everything else, side by side, protecting what they'd found in each other. The coyotes began their evening song, but tonight it sounded less like mourning and more like celebration. Or maybe that was just Samuel's imagination, colored by the warmth of the woman beside him and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the desert in unexpected colors. Purple lupines carpeted the hillsides, and the dry creek behind the ranch ran full with snowmelt. Samuel and Emma had thrown themselves into rebuilding after Brennan's attack, and the shared work had worn away the last barriers between them. Emma had taken to wearing her hair loose more often, the auburn strands catching sunlight as she worked in her expanded garden. She'd traded her worn dresses for practical pants and shirts when working, scandalizing the few visitors they received but moving with newfound freedom. Samuel found himself watching her more openly now, no longer pretending his interest was purely protective. The new barn stood half-finished, its fresh lumber bright against the weathered landscape. They worked side by side in comfortable rhythm, Emma holding boards while Samuel hammered, neither needing words to coordinate their movements. It was during one such morning that Emma first brought up the subject they'd been dancing around. "The trial's next month," she said, passing him another nail. "Brennan's lawyer sent word. Wants to depose me about—" "My character." Samuel's hammer paused mid-swing. "Let him try. Coleman says the evidence is clear. Evidence doesn't matter if they convince a jury I'm not worth protecting." Emma's voice was steady, but he caught the underlying worry. Fallen woman leads honest man astray. It's a story they'll love. You're not fallen. No? Unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, wearing trousers, shooting guns. She smiled without humor. "Face it, Samuel, I'm everything they warned their daughters not to become." Samuel set down his tools and turned to face her fully. "You're strong, independent, brave. If that threatens them, that's their failing, not yours. Pretty words won't sway a jury. Then we'll give them something else." The words emerged before he'd fully thought them through. But Samuel found he meant them. "Marry me?" Emma went very still. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, more certain now. "Not for them, not for appearances. For us." He took her hands, calloused from work, but still gentle. "I came here to die. Emma, you made me want to live. That's worth more than any courthouse paper, but if the paper helps protect you, then let's get it." "Samuel Hawthorne," she whispered, "are you proposing to me in a half-built barn while I'm wearing your old work clothes? Would you prefer I wait until you're in a dress?" That startled a laugh from her. "No, this is perfect. Us, working together, building something." Her eyes searched his. "But Samuel, I need you to be sure. Not because of Brennan or the trial, because you want this. Want me. I've wanted you since the day you lowered that rusty knife and decided to trust me," he admitted. "Maybe even since you made that desperate offer. So brave and broken all at once. I just took a while to admit it to myself." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I've loved you since you taught me to shoot. Since you looked at me and saw someone worth teaching, worth protecting, worth knowing." She squeezed his hands. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want." Samuel kissed her then, their first real kiss, standing in the unfinished barn with the sawdust in their hair and work dirt under their nails. It was nothing like the romantic scenes in Emma's books, and it was absolutely perfect. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was laughing and crying simultaneously. "What will people say? The mysterious rancher and his scandalous bride?" "Let them talk," Samuel said, pulling her close again. "We've got better things to do." They were married 3 days later in Jakob Muller's general store, with the shopkeeper and his wife as witnesses. Emma wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn from fabric Samuel had surprised her with, and Samuel wore his least patched shirt. It wasn't fancy, but Sheriff Coleman, who performed the ceremony, said he'd rarely seen two people more sure of their choice. That evening, as they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, Emma stood on the porch looking out at the land they now shared legally as well as emotionally. "Mrs. Samuel Hawthorne." She tested the words. "Emma Hawthorne. It sounds like belonging." "You belonged here long before any ceremony," Samuel said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "This just makes it official." Emma leaned back against him. "I have something to tell you. I wasn't sure before, but now—" She took a breath. "I think I'm carrying your child." Samuel's world tilted, then resettled into something new and wonderful. His hands moved to her still flat stomach, protective and awed. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for a week or two. The morning sickness started yesterday." She turned in his arms. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Samuel's voice was rough with emotion. "Emma, I thought I'd never have this again. Family, future, hope. You've given me all of it." They stood together as stars emerged in the darkening sky. The ranch spread around them, scarred by recent battles, but standing strong, ready for new life and new growth, just like them. "I want to plant a tree," Emma said suddenly. "A cottonwood, like the one where—" She trailed off, not wanting to mention Martha and Thomas on this day. "Where my first family rests," Samuel finished gently. "I think they'd like that. Martha always said the ranch needed more trees, said it would be a proper home when children could play in their shade." "Then we'll plant a whole grove," Emma declared. "One for each child. We'll make this place green and alive." "How many children are you planning on, Mrs. Hawthorne?" "As many as we're blessed with," she said simply. "I want this ranch full of laughter, full of life, everything they said I could never have." The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the trial and the baby. Emma's morning sickness was fierce but brief, and she attacked the house with a nesting instinct, making curtains for the repaired windows and planning a nursery in the small room off theirs. Word of their marriage spread quickly, shifting the narrative in town. The Scarlet Woman became the respectable Mrs. Hawthorne, and while some still whispered, many were charmed by the obvious love between the mysterious rancher and his young bride. Brennan's trial was almost anticlimactic, faced with testimony from Samuel, Emma, Sheriff Coleman, and half the town. The jury took less than an hour to convict. Brennan was sentenced to 5 years hard labor, his threats from the defendant's box falling on deaf ears. His remaining men had already scattered, wanting no part of a vendetta against a man with Samuel's reputation and a town's protection. After the verdict, as they walked to their wagon, Emma suddenly stopped. "Samuel, look." A familiar figure stood by their horses, a young woman, thin and travel-worn, with a baby in her arms. She looked up as they approached, fear and hope warring in her eyes. "Please," she said. I heard you help women who got nowhere else to go. My husband died in a mining accident, and his family says the baby ain't his, and I got nowhere." Emma looked at Samuel, a question in her eyes. He thought of their hard-won peace, their coming child, the quiet life they'd built. Then he thought of Emma that first night, desperate and brave, offering everything she had for shelter. "What's your name?" he asked the woman gently. Ruth Patterson. "And this is James." "Well, Ruth," Emma said, stepping forward. "I think we can find room. The barn's newly built, and we could use help with the ranch. Can you work?" "Yes, ma'am. I can cook, sew, tend animals, anything you need." Samuel and Emma exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. They'd found each other in desperation and built something beautiful. Maybe they could help others do the same. "Then welcome to the Hawthorne Ranch," Samuel said. "We protect our own here." As they helped Ruth into the wagon, Emma whispered to Samuel, "This is how it starts, isn't it? How we make something bigger than just us?" "Maybe," he agreed. "That a problem?" "No," Emma said, settling beside him on the wagon seat, one hand on her growing belly. "It's a purpose, a real one." They drove home through the spring afternoon, the desert blooming around them with promise. Behind them rode a scared woman with a baby. Ahead waited their ranch with room to grow, and beside each other sat Samuel and Emma Hawthorne, no longer running from the past but building a future, one rescued soul at a time. The cottonwood saplings they'd bought in town rustled in their pots, ready for planting. By the time they grew tall enough to shade children at play, Samuel suspected, the ranch would be full of life and second chances. Martha would have approved, he thought, and somewhere in the great beyond, perhaps she was smiling at the man who'd finally learned to live again, and the woman who'd taught him how. "Home?" Emma asked as the ranch came into view. "Home," Samuel confirmed, reaching over to take her hand, and for the first time in 6 years, he truly meant it. The summer brought unexpected visitors to the ranch. Word had spread through mysterious channels that the Hawthorne place offered sanctuary to women with nowhere else to turn. By July, Ruth had been joined by 2 others, Sarah, a war widow with twin daughters, and Margaret, barely 16 and cast out by her family for refusing an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. Samuel watched the transformation of his quiet ranch with bemused acceptance. The barn had been converted to comfortable quarters. A large vegetable garden fed everyone, and the sound of children's laughter echoed where silence had reigned for years. Emma, now visibly pregnant, orchestrated it all with quiet efficiency and fierce protectiveness. But not everyone appreciated their growing community. It started with small things: cut fence lines, poisoned water holes, dead coyotes left at their gate with threatening notes. Samuel increased security, teaching all the women to shoot and establishing night watches. But he knew confrontation was coming. It arrived on a scorching August afternoon in the form of Reverend Josiah Blackwood from Cedar Ridge, accompanied by a delegation of concerned citizens. "Mr. Hawthorne," the Reverend began, his thin face pinched with disapproval. "We've come about the situation here." Samuel leaned against the porch post, deliberately casual. "What situation would that be?" "You know very well. This house of fallen women you're running. It's becoming a scandal. I see a ranch with honest folk working hard to survive." Samuel replied, "Nothing scandalous about that." Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, stepped forward. "Those women are unwed mothers, runaway wives, and worse. Their presence attracts undesirable elements to our community." "Undesirable like Thomas Brennan?" Emma emerged from the house, her pregnancy evident beneath her simple dress. "Or undesirable like women who refuse to be victims?" The delegation shifted uncomfortably. Emma had gained a reputation in town, the reformed woman who'd made good through marriage, but also the crack shot who'd stood against Brennan. They weren't quite sure how to handle her. "Mrs. Hawthorne." Reverend Blackwood's tone was patronizing. "Surely you, having found redemption through marriage, understand the importance of proper moral guidance. These women need to face their sins, not hide from them." "What sins?" Emma's voice could have cut glass. "Ruth's sin of losing her husband? Sarah's sin of surviving the war? Margaret's sin of wanting to choose her own future?" She moved to stand beside Samuel. "Or is their real sin being women without male protection in a world that punishes them for it? The Bible says—" "Mrs. Henderson began. "The Bible says to care for widows and orphans." Emma interrupted. "To show mercy and compassion. But I suppose those verses don't make for good Sunday sermons." Samuel placed a calming hand on Emma's shoulder. She was magnificent in her anger, but stress wasn't good for the baby. "Folks, we're not breaking any laws. These women work for their keep, and we run a proper establishment. If that offends you, I suggest you look to your own consciences." "This isn't over," Reverend Blackwood warned. "The town council is considering measures to address establishments of questionable morality." "Then I'll see you at the next council meeting," Samuel said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." The delegation left in a cloud of dust and disapproval. As their carriages disappeared, Ruth emerged from the barn where she'd been listening. "We're causing you trouble. Maybe we should—" "You should get ready for supper," Emma said firmly. "Nobody's going anywhere." That evening, as the extended household gathered for the meal, Samuel noticed the worry on every face. These women had found safety here, and now it was threatened again. "We need to be smart about this," he said. "They'll use law and propriety against us if they can." "What if we gave them what they want?" Margaret suggested quietly. "On the surface. Anyway, make it official. A proper boarding house for women, with rules and rent and all the trappings of respectability." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "We could advertise in the Eastern papers. Western opportunities for independent women. Make it sound like a finishing school or something. And I could offer my services as a midwife." Ruth added, "Been catching babies since I was 12. That's respectable work." Emma smiled at the growing plan. "We incorporate, make it legal and above board, the Hawthorne Ranch and women's residence. They'll still fight us," Samuel warned. "Then we fight back." Emma said simply, "But smarter than they expect." Over the following weeks, they put their plan into action. Samuel filed the proper papers, establishing the ranch as a legitimate boarding concern. Emma wrote advertisements that walked the line between truth and acceptable fiction. Ruth began attending births in town, building goodwill among the women even as their husbands grumbled. The showdown came at September's town council meeting. The small courthouse was packed, the air thick with tension and tobacco smoke. Reverend Blackwood had proposed an ordinance limiting boarding houses to family members only, a clear attack on the ranch. Samuel stood to address the council, but Emma rose beside him. "I'd like to speak, if I may." The council exchanged glances but couldn't refuse a respectable married woman. Emma moved to the front, every eye upon her. "Gentlemen," she began, "you know me, know my story. A year ago, I was exactly what you're trying to legislate against, a desperate woman with nowhere to go. Samuel Hawthorne gave me shelter, work, and eventually his name. But what if he hadn't? What if there had been nowhere safe?" She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the women present. How many of us are one tragedy away from desperation? One death, one abandonment, one illness from having nowhere to turn. The ranch offers these women what I found: a chance to work, to heal, to choose their own paths. Pretty words. Councilman Morrison interrupted. "But it doesn't change facts. You're harboring women of questionable virtue." "I'm harboring women," Emma said sharply. "Just women. And if their virtue is questioned, perhaps you should question who did the questioning and why." She paused, letting that sink in. "But if it's facts you want, here are facts. Since opening our doors, the ranch has employed 6 women who might otherwise be begging on your streets. We've delivered 3 healthy babies who might have died without Ruth's skills. We've purchased thousands of dollars in supplies from your businesses. We pay taxes, obey laws, and contribute to this community. And attract undesirable elements," Reverend Blackwood insisted. "The only undesirable elements I've seen," Samuel spoke up, "came with Thomas Brennan, and this town stood against him. Are you less courageous now?" Jakob Muller stood from the audience. "I support the Hawthorne Ranch. They're good customers, good neighbors, and they help those who need it. Isn't that Christian duty?" Others began speaking. The doctor who'd worked with Ruth, the seamstress who bought vegetables from their garden, even Mrs. Coleman, the sheriff's wife, who'd quietly sought Ruth's help with a difficult pregnancy. The tide was turning, but Reverend Blackwood played his final card. "And what happens when your residents decide they prefer earning money on their backs instead of honest work? When cowboys come calling at all hours?" The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Samuel started to rise, anger flashing, but Emma's hand on his arm stopped him. Instead, Margaret stood up in the audience. "Reverend," the young woman's voice was clear and strong, "I came to the ranch because my father tried to sell me to settle a debt, not marriage sale. Like livestock, Mrs. Hawthorne taught me to read, to figure accounts, to defend myself. I work 14 hours a day and fall asleep proud of what I've built. If you think I'd trade that for what you're suggesting, then you understand nothing of women's strength or women's choices." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the back of the room, came slow applause. It was joined by another, then another, until half the room was clapping. When order was restored, the vote was called. The ordinance failed, 7-3. As they left the courthouse, Reverend Blackwood stopped Samuel. "This isn't over. God's law. God's law is love." Emma interrupted. "You might try reading about it sometime." They rode home under a full moon, the wagon filled with tired but victorious women. As the ranch came into view, lights glowing warm in the windows, Sarah began to sing, an old hymn about finding rest and sanctuary. Other voices joined in, creating impromptu harmony. Samuel reached for Emma's hand. "You were magnificent tonight." "We all were," she corrected. "That's what they don't understand. We're not fallen women or charity cases. We're a family, a strange one, maybe, but family nonetheless." As they pulled into the yard, Samuel saw a figure waiting on the porch, another woman, young and desperate-looking, holding a small bundle. "Please," she called out. "I heard. Is it true? Do you help women like me?" Emma was already climbing down from the wagon. "Come inside," she said gently. "You're safe now." Later that night, as they lay in bed with Emma's head on his chest and their child moving between them, Samuel reflected on the strange turns life took. He'd come to this ranch to die alone, and instead found himself patriarch to a growing community of survivors. "No regrets?" Emma asked sleepily. "None," he said, meaning it. "Though I wonder sometimes what I did to deserve all this." "You opened a door," Emma murmured. "To me, to all of us. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering in the distance. There would be other challenges. Blackwood wouldn't give up easily, and there were always those who hated what they couldn't control. But inside the ranch house, women and children slept safely, protected by walls both physical and spiritual. The Hawthorne Ranch and women's residence was more than just a boarding house now. It was a statement, a challenge to the frontier's harsh treatment of the vulnerable. It was proof that broken people could build something whole, that charity could wear boots and carry guns, that love came in many forms. And at its heart were Samuel and Emma Hawthorne, no longer running from the past but building a future where everyone had a chance to stand tall, work hard, and choose their own path. The storm broke just before dawn, bringing blessed rain to the thirsty land. And if it sounded like applause on the tin roof, well, perhaps it was. The attack came on a cold October night, when Emma was in her 8th month and the ranch had swelled to shelter 9 women and 6 children. Samuel woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. Not again, he thought, reaching for his rifle. But this wasn't Brennan's crude assault. This was organized, methodical. Windows shattered simultaneously on all sides. Smoke bombs rolled across the floors. In the chaos, Samuel heard Emma scream. He found her in their bedroom, cornered by 2 masked men. The rage that filled him was ice cold and lethal. The first man went down to the rifle butt. The second to a shot that grazed his shoulder and sent him fleeing. Emma stood pressed against the wall, one hand protectively over her belly. "Are you hurt?" "No, but the others." Screams and gunfire erupted from the barn. Samuel kissed Emma quickly. "Stay here. Bar the door." "Samuel, no!" But he was already gone, moving through the smoke-filled house like the soldier he'd once been. In the main room, Margaret and Ruth were back to back, holding off 3 attackers with the pistols he'd trained them to use. Sarah had barricaded herself and the children in the root cellar. The battle was fierce but brief. The women of Hawthorne Ranch were no longer helpless victims. They fought with the fury of those who'd found sanctuary and would die before losing it. When the smoke cleared, 2 attackers lay dead, 3 wounded, and the rest had fled into the night. But the victory came at a cost. The barn was ablaze, impossible to save. Worse, old Mary, who'd arrived just a week ago, had taken a bullet meant for one of the children. She lay in Ruth's arms, blood spreading dark across her dress. "Did I do good?" Mary whispered. "Did I protect them?" "You did perfect," Ruth assured her through tears. "Perfect." Mary smiled and was gone. As dawn broke, revealing the full extent of the damage, Sheriff Coleman arrived with a posse. He surveyed the scene grimly. This wasn't random, too organized. Samuel had reached the same conclusion. Blackwood? Can't prove it, but... Coleman held up a brass button. "This is from a railroad uniform. And guess who's been meeting with railroad representatives about buying up land?" The pieces fell into place. The ranch sat on the proposed route for a new rail line. What had started as moral outrage was really about money, the oldest frontier story. "They want us gone," Emma said, joining them despite Samuel's protests. "Not just because of what we represent, but because of what the land's worth. Then we disappoint them." Samuel said firmly, "Coleman, I want those bodies photographed before burial. Document everything. We're not just defending ourselves anymore, we're building a legal case." The next days were a whirlwind of activity. The barn was a total loss, but the community surprised them. Jakob Muller arrived with lumber. Doctor. Harrison brought medical supplies. Even some who'd opposed them initially came to help, shamed by the violence done in the name of their cause. Emma, despite being heavily pregnant, coordinated everything with remarkable calm. She wrote letters to newspapers in Denver and San Francisco, telling their story. She contacted a lawyer in the territorial capital. She turned their tragedy into a cause. It was while sorting through Mary's few belongings that they found it, a letter she'd never sent, addressed to her sister in Boston. In it, she'd written about finding peace at the ranch, about the family she'd discovered among other lost souls, about dying with purpose rather than shame. We send it. Emma decided, let her sister know she died a hero. The response to Emma's newspaper campaign was swift and unexpected. Letters poured in from across the territory, some condemning, but many supporting. Women sent donations. A group of Quakers offered legal aid. A wealthy widow in San Francisco wrote of establishing a trust to support their work. But the railroad wasn't finished. The second attack came through legal channels. A lawsuit claiming the ranch was a house of ill repute, operating under false pretenses. The hearing was set for November, just weeks before Emma's due date. The night before the hearing, Emma found Samuel on the porch, staring into the darkness. "You're thinking of sending us away," she said. It wasn't a question. "I won't lose you," he said roughly. "Not to bullets or courts or anything else. If leaving keeps you safe. Samuel Hawthorne, you listen to me." Emma moved to face him, fierce despite her ungainly size. "I didn't survive Millbrook and Brennan and everything else to run now. These women didn't fight and bleed to abandon what we've built. You taught me to stand my ground. Don't you dare ask me to retreat now." He pulled her close, feeling the baby move between them. "I already lost one family. Emma, I can't." "You won't, but if we run, they win. And every woman after us who needs shelter will have nowhere to go." She took his face in her hands. "This is bigger than us now. You know that." The hearing was held in the same packed courthouse where they'd won their first victory. But this time, the opposition had come prepared. Lawyer after lawyer presented evidence of impropriety, taken out of context, twisted, but damaging. Then the judge asked if the defense had any witnesses. Emma stood, but Samuel was already rising. "I'd like to speak, Your Honor." He'd never told his full story publicly. Now, he laid it bare. Martha, Thomas, the fever, the empty years after. His voice was steady as he described finding Emma, their unlikely partnership, the accidental creation of their sanctuary. "Your Honor," he concluded, "I know what it is to lose everything. These women know it too. We didn't set out to challenge anyone or change anything. We just tried to help each other survive. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. But if compassion is still legal in this territory, then I ask you to see what we've really built, not a house of ill repute, but a house of second chances." The courtroom was silent. Then Margaret stood. "I'd like to speak too." One by one, the women of the ranch told their stories. Ruth spoke of her husband's death and the false accusations that followed. Sarah described fleeing west with her daughters after the war. Each testimony was a window into the harsh realities faced by women alone on the frontier. But it was the last witness who turned the tide. A well-dressed woman entered the courtroom, causing a stir of recognition. Mrs. Catherine Thornberry, wife of one of the territory's richest men, walked to the witness chair with quiet dignity. "2 years ago," she began, "my husband beat me so badly I lost the child I was carrying. When I tried to leave, he had me declared hysterical and locked in my room. I escaped with the help of a servant and found my way to the Hawthorne Ranch." Gasps filled the room. This was scandal of the highest order. "I stayed only a month, long enough to heal and plan. The women there gave me strength I didn't know I had. When I returned to my husband, it was on my terms. He hasn't raised a hand to me since." She looked directly at the judge. "The Hawthorne Ranch saves lives, Your Honor, not just bodies, but souls. I'm living proof." The The judge's decision was swift. Case dismissed, and if anyone brings similar charges without substantial new evidence, they'll be prosecuted for harassment. As they left the courthouse, snow began to fall. The first of the season. Emma suddenly grabbed Samuel's arm. "Oh, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She smiled through what was clearly pain. "But I think our baby has decided to make an entrance." They barely made it back to the ranch before Emma's labor began in earnest. Ruth took charge, shooing Samuel out with the other expectant fathers she'd dealt with. He paced the porch despite the cold, listening to Emma's cries, remembering another night, another birth that ended in tragedy. "She's strong," Sarah assured him. "Bringing coffee. Strongest woman I know." "Strongest person," Samuel corrected, then froze as a new sound cut through the night, a baby's cry, lusty and alive. Ruth appeared at the door, beaming. "You have a daughter, Mr. Hawthorne, and she's perfect." Samuel rushed inside to find Emma propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. The baby had Emma's nose and what looked like his stubborn chin. When he took her carefully, she opened eyes that were already alert and curious. "What should we name her?" Emma asked. Samuel thought of all they'd been through, all they'd built, all the fights yet to come. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope Martha Hawthorne." "Hope," Emma repeated, smiling. "For the future we're building." As if in agreement, little Hope yawned and settled into sleep. Outside, the other women were singing softly, a lullaby for the newest member of their unconventional family. The ranch was scarred by battles, the barn still being rebuilt, their enemies still plotting. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Samuel sat beside his wife and daughter, listening to the voices of women who'd found strength in each other, looking out at the snow-covered land they'd defended with blood and determination. They'd won more than a legal battle. They'd proven that the frontier's harsh justice could be tempered with mercy, that the fallen could rise, that love could grow in the rockiest soil. The Hawthorne Ranch and women's residence would continue, a beacon for the desperate and a challenge to the powerful. And at its heart, a baby named Hope slept peacefully, promise of all the tomorrows her parents and extended family would fight to secure. The frontier was changing, one rescued soul at a time, and Samuel and Emma Hawthorne would be there for every step of the journey, together. The drought came in late spring, just as Hope was taking her first wobbling steps across the ranch house floor. The sky turned brass-colored and unforgiving. The creek dwindled to a trickle, and the carefully tended gardens began to wither despite all efforts. Samuel stood at the well, pulling up another bucket that was more mud than water. The ranch now housed 12 women and 8 children, and every drop was precious. He'd already sent Margaret and Ruth to town to negotiate for water rights, but the railroad company had bought up most of the available sources. "They're trying to strangle us out," Emma said, joining him. Hope balanced on her hip, reaching for her father with chubby hands. "If violence and law won't work, they'll use nature." Samuel took his daughter, marveling as always at her weight in his arms. "We've faced worse. Have we?" Emma's voice carried a weariness he rarely heard. "We can fight men, but we can't fight the sky." That evening, they held a meeting in the main house. The women gathered around the table, faces drawn with worry. The children, sensing the tension, played quietly in the corner. "We have maybe 2 weeks of water if we ration hard," Samuel reported. "The nearest available source is Coulter's Spring, but that's 15 miles through hostile territory." "The Briggs Ranch has water," Sarah suggested. "They've been friendly enough." "We're friendly," Ruth corrected. "Word is the railroad's offering bonuses to anyone who refuses to help us." Silence fell, heavy as the dust that coated everything. Then Margaret spoke up. "What about the old Apache wells? My grandmother was half Apache. She told stories about hidden springs in the canyon lands." Samuel frowned. "Those are just legends. Maybe, but desperate times." Margaret shrugged. "I could ride out, look for the markers she described." "Too dangerous." Emma said immediately, "If you got lost out there, then I'll go with her." Samuel decided. "Ruth, You and Emma can manage here for a few days. Keep the rifle close and the children closer." They left at dawn. Samuel and Margaret on the two strongest horses, loaded with what water they could spare. The landscape was lunar in its desolation, all color bleached away by the merciless sun. They rode in silence, saving energy, following Margaret's remembered directions. By the second day, Samuel was ready to turn back. Then Margaret pointed to a formation of rocks. "There, see how they look like an eagle spreading its wings? Grandmother said that marks the entrance." The canyon was a slash in the earth, barely wide enough for the horses. They descended carefully, the temperature dropping as the walls rose around them. And there, impossible but real, was green cottonwoods and willows clustered around a natural spring. "I'll be damned," Samuel breathed. They filled their canteens, watered the horses, and explored further. The spring was substantial, feeding a pool that disappeared into the rock. More important, it was on unclaimed land, too remote for the railroad to have noticed. "This could save us," Margaret said, wonder in her voice. They marked the trail carefully and rode hard for home, arriving just as a dust storm rolled across the ranch. Emma ran out to meet them, relief clear on her face. "Thank God. We had visitors while you were gone." Inside, she showed him a letter, an offer from the railroad. They'd buy the ranch for 10 times its assessed value, enough money to start over anywhere. "Generous," Samuel noted. "Suspicious," Emma countered. "They don't make offers like this unless they're desperate too." She smiled slowly. "I did some research while you were gone. Turns out, our ranch sits right where they need to put a water station. Without it, they'll have to reroute 20 miles north." Understanding dawned. They need us gone more than we need their money. Exactly. So what do we do? Samuel thought of the hidden spring, of the women who'd built new lives here, of hope toddling in the dust and calling it home. We dig in, and we survive. The next weeks were brutal. They organized water runs to the hidden spring, traveling at night to avoid detection. Every woman learned the route, in case something happened to those who knew it. The gardens were reduced to only essential vegetables, the rest of the land left to the drought's mercy. It was during one of these runs that they found her, a young Apache woman, heavily pregnant and near death from dehydration. Samuel recognized the signs of flight, the desperation of someone with nowhere left to go. They brought her back, and Ruth worked through the night to save her. When she finally woke, she spoke limited English but managed to convey her story, cast out for loving a white soldier who'd abandoned her, hunted by both her people and his. "She can stay," Emma said without hesitation, "if she wants." The woman, who told them to call her Maria, proved to be a gift from Providence. She knew every water source in 100 miles, every edible plant that could survive the drought. Under her guidance, they discovered other springs, smaller but vital, and learned to find moisture where none seemed to exist. The railroad tried one last assault, legal papers claiming the ranch was abandoned due to failure to maintain productive use of the land. The hearing was set for September. This time, they were ready. The courtroom was packed with their supporters, women who'd been helped, men who'd been shamed into conscience, children who'd grown up calling the ranch home, even Mrs. Thornberry was there, no longer hiding her support. The railroad lawyer presented his case confidently. The land was unproductive, the ranch failing, better served by progress and commerce. Then Emma rose to respond. She didn't speak of law or rights. Instead, she told stories of Mary, who died protecting children not her own, of Maria, bridging two worlds with quiet courage, of every woman who'd found strength in their community, every child who'd learned that family wasn't just blood but choice. "You say our land is unproductive," she concluded. "But we measure productivity differently. We grow hope. We harvest second chances. We irrigate with tears and determination. And what blooms is human dignity. If that's not valuable to your railroad, then perhaps it's the railroad that's failing, not us." When the judge ruled in their favor, again, the courtroom erupted. The railroad representative stormed out, but not before Samuel heard him mutter to his colleague, It's costing more to fight them than to go around. Let them have their desert fortress." That evening, the ranch celebrated. Tables were set in the courtyard, laden with food that represented their diverse community: Mexican beans, Apache fry bread, Eastern preserves, frontier stew. Musicians played, children danced, and for a moment, the drought seemed distant. Samuel found Emma standing apart, watching the celebration with tears in her eyes. Hope slept in her arms, exhausted from toddling after the bigger children. "We did it," he said softly. "They're giving up. For now." Emma replied, "There'll be other challenges. There always are. Then we'll face them, like we always do." Emma leaned into him, and they stood together watching their extended family celebrate. The ranch bore the scars of every battle bullet holes in the walls, the rebuilt barn, the struggling gardens, but it stood, defiant and proud, a testament to the power of community and compassion. "Remember that first night?" Emma asked, "when I said those desperate words? 'I will sleep with you,'" Samuel quoted softly. "Scared the hell out of me. I was offering my body because I thought it was all I had." She smiled up at him. "I never imagined I'd find my soul instead, that we'd build all this." "What do you think comes next?" Samuel asked. Emma considered. "More women will come, more children. Maybe we'll build a school, a proper infirmary. Maybe other ranches will follow our model." She shifted hope to her other arm. "Or maybe we'll just keep doing what we do, offering shelter to those who need it, one soul at a time." Thunder rumbled in the distance, the first promise of rain in months. The party paused as everyone looked to the sky, where clouds were gathering like answered prayers. "Papa," Hope said sleepily, reaching for Samuel. "Up." He lifted his daughter high, and she laughed with pure joy as the first drops began to fall. Around them, women and children danced in the rain, celebrating the drought's end and their community's survival. The Hawthorne Ranch had become more than a refuge. It was proof that the frontier could be tamed not by violence or greed, but by compassion and courage. That the West could be won not through conquest, but through community. As the rain intensified, washing the dust from the land and filling the cisterns with life-giving water, Samuel pulled his family close. Emma was already planning the new plantings they could do, the expansion of the facilities, the future they could build now that the railroad had retreated. The storm swept across the desert, bringing renewal to the parched earth. Lightning illuminated the ranch in brief. Brilliant flashes, the buildings they'd defended, the gardens they'd saved, the people they'd gathered. It was a hard-won paradise, carved from hostile land by desperate souls who'd found strength in each other. And at its heart stood Samuel and Emma Hawthorne, no longer the broken man and desperate girl who'd met over a rusted knife and a terrible proposition. They were partners, protectors, parents, proof that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that kindness could survive in the wildest places, that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the simple act of opening a door. The rain continued through the night, drumming on the roof like applause, like celebration, like the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. The desert would bloom again, the ranch would thrive, and the women who'd found sanctuary would continue to build lives of dignity and purpose in the wild, unforgiving West. The Hawthorne Ranch stood as an oasis, not just of water, but of hope, and that, Samuel thought as he held his wife and daughter in the doorway of their imperfect, wonderful home, was worth every fight they'd weathered and every battle yet to come. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the Wild West. I hope Emma and Samuel's story touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening to this tale of love and redemption? Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across the harsh frontier. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of courage, love, and the indomitable human spirit. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of their journey resonated most with you? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own horizons.